Hello, and welcome to this, our 111th live stream, Questions in the Garden. This is, of course, referring to our most recent teaching video with Death in the Garden. And we want to encourage you all, after the live stream, to go watch that video if you haven't already. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight, and we're going to take your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible like we do every week. So, the rules are the same as always, which is super chats have priority. That's true across all YouTube, so that shouldn't become as a surprise to anyone. But we also take non-super chat questions as well. We ask that when you do that, put a Q and a colon in front of your question, so we know it's directed to me personally, because we know there's a lot of chatter going on in the live chat. So we want to differentiate those questions that are specifically targeted to me. Second, do not repeat your questions. Okay, this came up earlier already. I keep very close track of the questions that are posted. So even if you had posted it days ago and you think it's disappeared, it really hasn't. Okay, I've seen the question already, and I've either decided to take it or I haven't. So please don't repost a question. Also, if it's a question concerning the Bible or a foreign language, I need a little context. So in the case of a question from the Bible, we ask that you include what book it's from, what chapter, and what verse it is. So I don't have to scramble around looking for it. And if it's a foreign language, I ask that you just tell me what language you think it's in and what you think it means. So, with that said, let's get into the questions. Okay. We're going to start the night with 4 non-super chats. Our first question is from Let Me Explain, followers of the shepherd. He asks, how many dynasties existed in Egypt? When I looked it up, I saw sources that say from 30 to 33. Why are there differences? Great question. The whole system of numbering dynasties came from an Egyptian priest named Manetho. He was a 3rd, 4th century Egyptian priest, well, 3rd century really, 3rd century Egyptian priest who went back through the documents of Egypt and basically constructed a history of the dynasties of Egypt. Now, he numbered those dynasties. However, Egypt was also not at the end of its tenure either when he did this, okay? So, there has been some debate whether those should be renumbered, okay? Because, for example, he didn't include the Persians as a dynasty because there was so much animosity between the Egyptians and the Persian occupants, conquerors, that many Egyptians did not feel right about making them a dynasty. So Dynasty 30 is the dynasty that ended up with Nekhti-Nebo, one of the guys who, the last native Egyptian king before being ousted by the Persians. Okay, the second dynasty of Persians. So this leads to, how do we get the 33 count? Okay. You've got, of course, the 30 Egyptian dynasties, including some of the foreign ones like the Hyksos. Okay, they're included in those dynasty counts as well. But there's 2 Persians of dynasties, so that's your 31 and 32, and then you have the Ptolemies, which are also not given an official dynasty number, but depending on who's doing the counting, would be 33. So that's how you get 30 to 33, is whether or not they include the Persians and the Ptolemies. Usually, though, they just, I mean, it depends upon who's doing the counting. You do get some people who say there was 31 dynasties because they're not counting the Persians, and then you get those who say there's 33 because they are counting the Persians and the Ptolemies. So, that should answer the question. Thank you very much for the question. Interesting question, and it just comes down to who's doing the counting. All right, our next super chat, or I should say our next non-super chat, is from 501 Mobius. Thank you very much for the question. If Exodus is in 1265, then if it is 430 years, or Exodus 1240, or 1215 years, it doesn't get Jacob meeting a Hyksos king or Abraham to the time of Hammurabi. Is there some way to adjust the time to do this? Well, first of all, we need to note, okay, we are not told how long the Israelites were in Egypt. The best, for example, the best text critical information we have on, say, Exodus 1240 basically says it was 430 years in Egypt and Canaan. Okay, that "and" is really important. This is one of the places where, say, the Masoretic text is, say, inferior to the Samaritan Pentateuch or the Septuagint, which both have Egypt and Canaan, just in reversed order. So there's strong textual evidence, and this is even supported by Paul when he talks about the Israelite sojourn, that this is a number that includes both their time in Canaan and from the promise of Abraham. Now, we're not told which promise. There's 2 promises given to Abraham. There's an early promise and a late promise. Okay? You've got the first promise that he will be the father, basically before Isaac is even born, that he'll be the father of many nations. Then there's the second promise when he goes and when Abraham tries to sacrifice Isaac. He gets another theophany and a second promise. So we're not even told which promise to base this on. So there's two promises. And the Exodus 6 seems to indicate that the span of time was really closer to 350 years. If you take the genealogies of Moses' parentage, okay? So his clan longevity seemed to indicate that the sojourn was 350 years or less. So that's going to be very... Okay, so it's 250 years is probably too short. 430 is too long. Once you get around 300 and, say, 300 years, you're hitting that sweet spot now where you have, say, the Exodus in 1265, and then you have Jacob meeting the Hyksos during the 15th dynasty. Because that works out to roughly 1565, which is just, you know, still in that tenure of the Hyksos rule. So, and then the rest sort of takes care of itself, more or less. Because then you have, you're in that sort of 1600 spot, and then you can date that, you know, with Isaac and the generations of Isaac and the length of Abraham's reign, you can easily, you know, nail that down to the time of Hammurabi. Okay? So, anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the question. It's a good question. Someday I'm going to write a formal paper on this because I think it's important. I've done back of the envelope calculations on this several times, so I know the numbers work. It's just, you know, in my copious free time, I need to write an academic paper on this. Yeah, when do I get that copious free time? Hey, honey, how much copious free time do I have? She says, between the 4 hours of sleep I get a night? Yeah, about that. That's my free time, is my 4 hours of sleep a night, when I get 4 hours. Ooh. Last night it was 4 hours, and I was lucky. I've had several nights over the last 2 weeks where it's been 2 hours. So, sleep is for the weak. All right, so thank you very much for the question, 501 Mobius. It's good to see you here. The next non-super chat here is from Warrior the Most High. Were the ancient Egyptians unable to distinguish between R and L like the Japanese? Know that the hieroglyph for L being a lion is very late, Hellenistic period maybe. Okay, actually, they couldn't. The R and the L were very close in Egyptian, just like the Japanese. Now, they had a lion representing L, but that's a late differentiation. Even the lion could sometimes be spoken as an R. Generally before the advent of the lion, which is actually in late Egyptian. It's actually early. It's earlier than the Hellenistic period. It's earlier than the Hellenistic period. We do find it in late Egyptian. So we start seeing it around, say, Dynasty, in the orthography around Dynasty 20. So, before then, they had the mouth hieroglyph, which was the R and L combined. So, yeah, absolutely, they had difficulties. R is in London, right? Yeah, that sort of thing. But yeah, they had the same sort of issues. They didn't have a strong differentiation between R and L. I mean, Hebrew had a strong differentiation between R and L. You had the Resh and you had the Lamed. Okay? So, but you didn't have that in Egyptian. So that made some of these transliterations between Hebrew and Egyptian somewhat tenuous sometimes. So, like as Darkblade just pointed out in the Merneptah Stela, it's Yisrael. So, you know, you did have that. So anyway, thank you very much for that question. It's a good question. I love a good grammar and orthography question, and that's why we took it. And finally, even though he did do a double question post, we will take this question from NicoKR777 just because I think it's a neat question. Why is the Sphinx missing its nose? Did the sound foxes take it? Could be. Could be. The Sphinx's nose, we don't exactly know when it fell off, okay? We do know that the Sphinx had a nose, okay? And we also know that the earliest record of the Sphinx not having a nose is during, say, the Islamic period. So there's already record during the Islamic period that the Sphinx didn't have a nose. So it's been gone for a long time. Now, what most people don't realize is that Sphinx also had a beard, a really, really large beard, and a statue sitting on the beard. And that's because we have some sketches of the Sphinx. So, some ancient sketches. So we know it was actually it had a whole lot of extra stuff on it. It had been fully painted at one point. So I mean, when it was new, this would have been an incredible sight. You know, fully painted, fully decorated. It would have been just a magnificent statue, absolutely magnificent. But yeah, they had a full beard, where basically. Tutmosis III put his dream stela. There used to be, as I said, a full statue and beard there. And it fell away too. And we think it was removed by erosion. Now, what happened to the nose? Nobody knows. Nobody knows where the nose went. Okay. So, it could have been sound foxes. Good theory as any. But the fact is that a lot of statues, too, the first thing that falls off is essentially the nose. Because it extends from the face. So, you know, it's subject to abrasion, erosion, malice. You know, people do come on and smash the noses off of statues. So we don't know exactly why the nose fell off the Sphinx. But it's been that way for a long, long time. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and enjoy the channel. All right, now we're on to the super chats.
Played a really big game of got your
like that. Yeah, really big game for a really big nose. Oh boy. Kiara just said, when we reach 10,000 subs, the Sound Foxes will be at the celebration. Indeed, they will. We have something special planned for 10,000 subscribers. So, and it does include Sound Foxes. So, there we go. Okay, as soon as that question pops up, I'll take it here. Okay. Yep. It just hasn't shown up on my thing yet. So, there we go. Haystacks asks, was the erosion of the Sphinx due to wind or water? Wind. Oh, yeah. The Giza Plateau suffers from really, really severe wind erosion. And even though it used to be a floodplain, it hasn't had it doesn't get serious rain very often. It's the wind though can just eat away stone like you won't believe. There's actually a temple on the Giza Plateau that that dates to Menkaure, so after the construction of the Sphinx. And it's just totally eaten away by wind erosion. I mean, it looks like a piece of Swiss cheese. Like, okay, a 15-foot tall piece of Swiss cheese, but a piece of Swiss cheese nonetheless. I mean, it's got holes dug out of the stone that are like 3 feet deep. I mean, that wind erosion, you cannot believe. And if you're out there in, I mean, not in the touristy places, but if you're out there on the Giza Plateau and there's a good wind whipping up, oh yeah, you're covering up from the sand. I mean, it's just brutal. It's absolutely brutal. So yeah, it is basically wind erosion, wind picking up sand and just abrading things. It's like a natural sandblaster. You know, it will erode anything soft, and limestone soft. So anyway, thank you for the question, the follow-up question. Now we're going to get back to the super chats. Okay, our first super chat here from the night.
POB, like you say, the wind there is exfoliation.
Okay, we'll take that one. That's actually pretty good. Mr. Rich B.O.B. Might you say the wind there is exfoliating and not brutal? Oh, I don't know. Exfoliating and brutal, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to ever be caught in a sandstorm out there. It's just, yeah, it's not a great experience. I'll tell you that. It'll strip the paint off your car. It's like I was out driving on the highway, and I wasn't driving myself. I had a driver, but I was coming back from from Abydos, and there's this sandstorm rolling in on us, and my driver's just putting the pedal on the metal to escape the sandstorm. Because he had this black SUV, and the last thing he wanted was all his paint stripped off. But I mean, it's like it is. You're looking at it like basically a wall of sand coming towards you. I mean, it's kind of freaky. I mean, it's very freaky. So I mean, it did look a lot like that sandstorm from The Mummy. You know, that sort of opaqueness. Really, I mean, you can't see through a sandstorm. It's just really wild. So, yeah, that was good times. Good times. Okay. Let's get to the super chats. Our first super chat here is from Missing for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Dr. Falk, what are your thoughts on the authorship and dating of Deuteronomy? Is there any information revealed in the language or the archaeology? Okay, well, now I generally hold to a kind of supplemental hypothesis, okay? And that's basically that the core documents were generally written by Moses and then later on stitched together. Now, as they were being stitched together, the language was updated and modernized to more Hebrew sensibilities. I do tend to hold to an earlier date of Deuteronomy. I do think some of it was updated during the Israelite monarchy. I also think that most of the core documents, however, date to Moses. So I think what happened was that Moses wrote a lot. I think he was a voluminous writer. And basically the priests of Israel and they were left with the tons of these correspondence. Basically this writing that Moses had done. And that they're shuffling it around and figuring out what goes where. So I think that process of stringing them all together took time. Not necessarily redaction, okay? Not necessarily redaction, but definitely editorializing for smoother reading. Okay. So I think most of this is going to take place at the very, very latest Iron Age 2, before the Babylonian exile. I don't date Deuteronomy to after the Babylonian exile. I definitely date it pre-Babylonian exile. And I do date the core, I do ascribe the core documents to Moses. Some of the glosses, there are glosses in there, and some of the smoothing text, the text between documents, is definitely scribal based and not from Moses. Like, for example, you'll see sometimes at the beginning of a chapter, this is what Moses spoke to the community. Well, Moses is not writing about himself in the third person. Okay, this is an editor later on, basically giving you a little bit of context for you to key into what's going on in the text. Okay. Likewise, the death of Moses, at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, was not written by Moses. Might have been written by Joshua, might have been written by a different priest or prophet, but it was definitely not written by Moses. So not everything in the Pentateuch was written by Moses. With that said, however, I do think the core documents were. Okay. So anyway, the language itself doesn't tell us a whole lot. It does seem to be an older phase of Hebrew than what we find in, say, the prophets, like Ezekiel, like Isaiah. And Isaiah dates to the 8th century. Okay, so, and that's pretty uncontroversial, even with documentary hypothesis supporters. So, given that we have, say, modernization of the text in Isaiah to a Middle Hebrew, the fact that we have an older type of Hebrew in the Pentateuch, even in Deuteronomy, does seem to indicate that it predates even the prophet Isaiah. Yeah, we'll take that. 501 Mobius asks, could some verses get put in the wrong order? Not likely, because I think what they're dealing with here is whole papyruses. Okay? They're not dealing with little verses here and there. Okay, what they're dealing with is pages. They're dealing with documents, whole documents, and they're basically taking whole documents and stringing them together. Now, is it possible that they made an editorial choice where, say, one document was before another? Sure, that could easily happen. Because they might be doing it for pedagogical purposes. They might be doing it for teaching purposes, that basically a document that was written earlier is put later in the book because it more fits with a thematic role. Okay, that's entirely possible. These people are not writing history the way we do. They're not going to be slavishly adhering to a chronology. So we do have to be a little careful about this. So just because it does say chapter 1 happens before chapter 2, doesn't necessarily mean chapter 1 happened first. Because again, a lot of this stuff has been arranged for not just, say, chronology, but for topic, for theme, for teaching, all that stuff. So anyway, thank you for the question. And I want to thank our super chatter here, Missing here, for a very, very interesting question. So thank you very much for the super chat. Our next super chat here is from Mr. Rich BOB for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. If a clan is 4 generations, do you believe that Jacob, Genesis 47:2, is the second living CA? What's it? CA? Don't know what CA here is. I think it means cause. his 70s and answering for his clan. Are there examples in ancient Near Eastern literature of this? Okay. I'm just trying to understand the question here. You've abbreviated it a fair bit. So, circa. Okay. Circa his 70s and answering for his clan. Yes, he would be answering for his clan. We don't see this so much in ancient Near Eastern literature because we don't have the literature of, say, nomadic peoples. Okay. We find this, however, actually in modern Bedouin studies. If you really want to see this in action, yeah, absolutely, Jacob is answering for his clan. There's no doubt about this. So he's answering for his clan, and we do see this in that modern Bedouin do the same thing. They'll say, okay, yeah, okay, how old is Hussein? Oh, Hussein, he's 700 years old. 700 years old. He's answering for his clan. He's answering for the lifespan of his clan. So, by Von Mobius, I don't have a good opinion of Jacob. Deceitful and a liar. Yeah, he was. There were a lot of scoundrels, though, in the Bible. Come on. Really. So, yeah. He was living into his 70s, but, he was answering for his clan when he was presented before Pharaoh. Okay? So that 131 short, hard years, that's the history of his clan. So, but again, we don't see this in ancient Near Eastern literature, but we do see this in ethnographic studies of the Bedouin. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, and I hope that helped. Okay, the next super chat here. Spin it to the top here. Is from Addison Weir for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat, and it's good to see you here. Okay, I need to just move this over a bit. And he says, did you see Zach Miller's most recent interview with Matthew Lynch? Yes, I did. If so, what are your thoughts? Okay, I did see What Your Pastor Didn't Tell You with his interview of Matthew Lynch. Now, Matthew Lynch is actually a local here. He teaches at Regent College in their Old Testament department. I thought Lynch's view was very nuanced. It wasn't simple. I mean, you could really tell that it was the collection of a lot of different theories that he sort of has stitched together to get a view of the conquest as primarily a defensive position, not an offensive position. He's got things that I do very much agree with in his view, like, for example, the whole idea of using genre to say that, the whole, hyperbole of war statements. Okay, and there's lots of examples in the ancient Near East of that, so that's sort of not that controversial. I think, however, I noticed he got into, at least it appeared to me, that he got into a bit of trouble when he extended that hypothesis to essentially say that the Israelites were conquering Israel and fighting Egyptians. I thought that view was a bit thin. The fact is that the Israelites were not that successful at least taking the garrison towns of the Egyptians. In fact, garrison towns were mostly, a lot of them were isolated from their Egyptian masters, and basically survived for centuries afterwards. So, but he said some things that I thought were a little suspect, like Merneptah. invading Israel in the 11th century. That's a no. That's a definite no. Merneptah invaded at the end of the 13th century. Okay, so I don't think Lynch's view of history of Egypt was that strong. So this is where I thought that his hypothesis was the most weak. But I do appreciate his idea that we should be reading these documents in a very, very nuanced way, because that's the way it presents it. So I like the fact that his view is not simplistic. I like the fact that he's really thinking through the various aspects of violence and genre. And I like his reasoning as to why Israel was told that it was going to take time to secure the promised land. I think that all that was really well done. As I said, the only weak point of the hypothesis is his view of Egyptian history. I think that needs improvement. But apart from that, I thought it was a great interview. I thought Lynch teased out his view very well. I thought there's aspects of it that are very convincing that I liked. If it wasn't for the Egyptian aspect, I'd probably be totally on board with it, because it does make a lot of sense. Okay? But that Egyptian view is going to have to change, because it's not consistent with what we know of Egyptian history. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And yeah, I saw the interview and I actually quite liked it. Okay. Addison Weir for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. What exactly are eunuchs in the Bible? Ooh, I was hoping no one would ever ask this question. Okay, well, we'll answer this. He says, I've seen a few alphabet people activists use them to argue for there being non-binary people in the Bible. Okay. Wolfgang, Alan Elzard, the Snip Man? No. That's not how they did eunuchs in the Bible. It's worse than that. It's much, much worse than the Snip. Ugh. Well, okay. The trans community has nothing to do with eunuchs in the Bible. Nothing at all. Okay? How do I say this nicely? The meatballs are placed between two large stones and crushed. Yeah. How could anyone survive the shot? Says El N Capones Conrafi. Some of them didn't. Honestly. Jack Ray, they had that crushing feeling. Yeah. Yeah, essentially what they did was used blunt force trauma to crush the testicles so they were non-functional. That's how they created eunuchs in the Bible, in the biblical age. JP asks a great follow-up question. Why not just snip if you're going to do it? Risk of infection. Okay? You create an incision, your risk of infection is so high that you're likely to die. Okay? Yared, Daniel 2. Oh, yes. Yeah, Daniel got that treatment also. For sure. anybody who worked in the palace, in the government of the Babylonians, had to undergo this, unless they were soldiers. Soldiers got to keep their parts because they needed it. Ooh, yeah, it was. Darkblade, here, chew on this plant. That's the closest we'll have to anesthetic for the next 2,000 years. About it, yeah. Yeah, this is a brutal process, and indeed, some people didn't survive it. They were in agony for weeks and months, and then they had all the problems that came with it, like weak bones, deteriorating joints. So these people didn't live that long either. They lived into usually their 60s. They usually didn't survive beyond their 60s because of the deterioration, as I said, of bones and joints. So there was a lot of consequences to doing this too. So yeah, it shortened their lifespan, but it also made them safe around the royal harem. So that's exactly why they were put through this process. Damn it, it's horrible that I'm now picturing a giant Babylonian nutcracker. Oh, jeez. Yeah, that's saying something. Ooh. Yeah. You'd think they would use a knife, but they didn't. They used stones. Big, heavy stones. Woo. Okay. Darkblade, why would that deteriorate the bones? Let's take that follow-up question. That's actually a really good question. It did not come up. We're going to take Darkblade's question here because non-superchat, because it's actually a really good question. Okay, why would that deteriorate bones? There aren't any real bones in that area. No, but in male adolescent development, and most of the time this was done on young males who are about 12, 13, okay? This 12, 13 is when males undergo their growth spurt, okay? And their growth spurt, requires large amounts of testosterone to supplement bone density. Without that testosterone, you got bone growth, but not bone strength. So, and studies, medical studies have shown this over and over and again. There was actually a medical study done on the castrati, which were Italian eunuchs that were basically done. They were made eunuchs for the purposes of singing, because it kept their voice, their Adam's apple from dropping, their larynx from dropping. So the castrati could hit these really, really high notes. Well, in the 19th century, they did a lot of medical studies of the castrati, and they were able to show that it led to osteoporosis at a very young age. So I will leave it up to the audience to figure out what's going to happen to a lot of these people now that are undergoing, say, transition surgery, especially in their young teen years. Because the process of that balance between hormonal levels and growth is intricately tied. So, yeah, that's why. That's why it causes your bones to deteriorate. And frankly, it's one of the reasons why let's say low testosterone levels is why you see a lot of osteoporosis in women. you actually see higher levels of osteoporosis in women than men because they don't have those high testosterone levels. But it's worse in the case of the castrati, because in the case of castrati, they have more bone growth. So there's more bone growth and therefore much weaker bones. So they actually get hit with osteoporosis even earlier than women. So it's an incredibly interesting thing, but this is, again, one of those forensics. I mean, there's been several studies of this. So this is not a secret to anyone. At least it shouldn't be. So anyway, thank you for that follow-up question. Again, very interesting follow-up question. I don't know what he means by secet. What do you mean by secet? You're gonna have to define that word. Because one of the things, unless is that the, I'm gonna assume that just means eunuch, but yeah. Yeah, the process of making eunuchs in Egypt was pretty much the same. Now, the one difference, yeah, the one thing about eunuchs in Egypt is they were very uncommon. The Babylonians made all their court officials eunuchs, all except for the soldiers. In Egypt, only the guards of the harem were made eunuchs. Nobody else was. So none of the palace administrators were eunuchs. So there were actually very, very few eunuchs in Egypt. So this is some cultural difference between, say, Egypt and, say, Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, all the officials were eunuchs, practically. But in Egypt, very, very few were. Okay? So, anyway, thank you for that follow-up question, and but that's the reason why we actually don't see very many eunuchs at all in Egypt. So, Mechanique saved all their big heavy stones for the pyramids. I think everyone agrees that it was a better use for those big heavy stones. Okay. I don't know about Chinese eunuchs. Sorry, Cam. He asks, was it the same for Chinese eunuchs? I don't know enough about Chinese eunuchs to know. I know the Chinese had a lot of them. That's about all I know. But I don't know what the process was for that. So, all right, we're going to go back to the Super Chats now. But this was an interesting rabbit trail. Okay, so to wrap up, let's get right back up to the top here. Okay, so I want to thank Edison Weir for a very interesting question. It was a horrifying rabbit trail, absolutely. Yeah, none of you are going. Hey, you think I don't sleep? None of you are going to sleep now. You're going to be up all night. Okay, the next super chat here is from JP for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Can you explain the difference between Nefesh, Ruach, and Rephaim in the Hebrew? Okay. The Nefesh is, of course, the spirit. The Ruach, but it's more kind of like the how do I say this? The soul. Okay. The living essence. Okay. Ruach can mean spirit or wind. Okay. And Rephaim. Now, I know of a Rephaim is being, say, giants, or at least tall people. Now, I can see if it has a secondary meaning that should I be aware of it. Let me just take a quick look here in Halot, just in case I missed something there. But Rephaim. Okay. Yeah, the derivation of it is uncertain according to Halak. Spirit of the Dead is one possible translation. It's also the name of a people. So there's more than one here potential meaning for this. So spirits of the dead, shades is what they would call Rephaim. So and then you had the people who were say lived in the Arnon, who were like Og, who was called a Rephaim. So it's hard to know exactly. There might not be much of a difference between these when it comes right down to it. For example, what in Genesis when it says, God breathed ruach into the human and he became a nephesh, a living being. Okay? So you have that. And then you have, say, the ruach returning to God in, say, Ecclesiastes. So it's likely here that the nephesh is sort of the intellect, say the whole idea of, say, the soul as such, that union of body and spirit. And then the ruach is the sort of the life force. It's the life force. It's the living force. Okay. And then the Rephaim would be under that secondary definition would be spirit of the dead. So one of the things I would probably comment on is that one of the things we would say about, say, spirits, okay, is they do develop over time. So say, you wouldn't have the same quality of spirit between, say, a child who died and a 70, 80-year-old who died. There'd be different developmental phases in the life of between those two individuals, and thus the development of the soul would probably be different in the case of the 80-year-old. So the Rephaim could very well be a matured soul, as in a mature ruach or nefesh. But again, we don't know exactly for sure. A lot of this is really unclear. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. But this is also an area that's very controversial, and that not everyone knows the answers for these either. So anyway. Okay, we're going to take his next super chat here, which happens to be, I think he's talking about the soul again. He gives us a $2 super chat. Thank you very much for that super chat. Thoughts on the trichotomy versus dichotomy debate? I think you mean tripartite versus dipartite debate. I think that's what you're trying to get at based upon your previous question. Is there 3 parts of the person, or is there 2? Okay. The dipartite is the humanity is basically a body and a soul. And the tripartite is body, soul, and spirit. Okay. Now, I don't have which one I go for depends on what side of the bed I get out of. I'm going to be very honest. I don't have a firm opinion on this. Simplicity would tell me that the dipartite is actually probably more correct. Okay, because you have a body, you have a soul. When you die, the soul goes directly to God. It doesn't get separated from a spirit. So simplicity would tell me that that the dipartite is probably more correct. Now, when I get on the other side of the bed, there's a argument for the tripartite human that is very compelling, which is that if you have a body, soul, and spirit, and the spirit is not just a synonym for the soul, this leads to a very interesting consequence. One of the things about intelligence is recent studies in intelligence have shown that you can't have intelligence without, say, community. And this is actually part and parcel even to recent AI models like ChatGPT. You know, ChatGPT isn't just one computer. It's a cluster of many computers interacting with each other. They've discovered this, that intelligence works in community. Okay? So if you've got a human brain and somehow we're intelligent, the questionable proposition at best. If you have spirit and soul interacting with each other as a kind of mental community, you've got the makings there for intelligence. So that's actually a very compelling case for the tripartite person. Very compelling. Because you're actually having self-talk to formulate new thoughts. This is the one thing that would make me more likely to accept the tripartite view of the person. Now, the Bible is not dogmatic about this. The Bible does mention, that there could be a difference between the soul and spirit, but doesn't say what it is. But indeed, I think there's good grounds for either side. There's good grounds for either side of this debate. And both have compelling arguments. And which one I choose to believe in depends on which side of the bed I get up in the morning. Because I think they're both very compelling arguments. The simplicity argument's very compelling. You have body, soul, and N+. Doesn't matter after that. The intelligence argument, community and intelligence using community, that's a very compelling case for the tripartite soul. So, I will leave that up to you to decide which one you choose. Okay? I don't have a firm opinion on this. Again, I think both sides have very compelling arguments. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And there is a follow-up question, which I will take here. Cambrit asks, is spirit more like intelligence and the soul more like the life force in the 3-part 1? We're not sure. Some have said that, say, the spirit is more like your emotions or your life force, and the soul is more like your thought processes or memories. But again, these could be interchangeable as well. So we don't know. We don't know if soul and spirit are exactly the same. Do they inhabit one half of your brain while the other one is in the other half? Nobody knows. But we do know that, say, the brain is sort of divided in this way. where you have two halves of the brain, and they only talk to each other through the cerebral cortex. You know, and actually, here's one of the ways that men and women differ too. Women have wires that connect the two halves. Men don't. Those connections, those neurons die at puberty. So, yeah, really, yeah. It's one of the sex differences. One of the 50+ sex differences. Yeah, women retain those interlinks between the two halves. Men don't. That's why. My producer just said that's why women talk more. Well, it's also one of the reasons why a lot of women, you know, don't compartmentalize. Yeah, women too tend to think a lot more holistically, and that's the reason. So anyway, want to thank you up for that follow-up question. It's a very interesting question. The Bible doesn't define what the soul and spirit really are, but and there's a lot of guesses on this one. But the soul talking to the spirit would be a strong, make a strong case for why humans are gifted with this particular kind of intelligence too. So, anyway, thank you for that question. Very much appreciated. Okay, back to the super chats. Oh, we're going on quite some rabbit trails tonight, aren't we? It's a rabbit trail night. Okay. Okay, JP for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Does Samuel 28:11-14 suggest that souls have the same physical appearance as our bodies and even our clothes? This is a very, very interesting question. We do get from Samuel 28:11-14 the idea that Samuel was recognizable by his appearance. Now, let's bring that up, because I think that's actually worthwhile. So, 2 Samuel. Second Samuel 28. I think actually it must be 1 Samuel, because there's 6 Samuel doesn't have 28. So 1 Samuel 28 verses 11-14. Okay, and the text reads, Then the woman said, Whom shall I bring up for you? And he said, Bring up Samuel for me. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice, and the woman spoke to Saul, saying, Why have you deceived me? For you are Saul. And the king said to her, Do not be afraid. What do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a divine being coming out of the earth. And he said to her, What is his form? And she said, An old man is coming up, and he is wrapped with a robe. And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed his face to the ground and did homage. Okay. Now, there has been a lot of studies of, say, apparitions, ghosts, to put a better, more common term to it, but apparitions. And there have been some very, very interesting observations. people generally do not see naked apparitions. Now, in general, when people do see apparitions, they're fully clothed. They are generally humaniform looking. And one of the most interesting observations that people have made about apparitions, and this is one of the strangest things that about apparitions and ghost sightings, okay, which is that even though they are fully clothed, people almost never describe them having shoes or feet. Okay? Okay. So, unless the person observing it happens to be obsessed with shoes. Okay, that's the only exception to this. Like, for example, a woman who is obsessed with shoes and she sees a ghost, chances are she'll see notice the shoes of the ghosts. We don't know why that is exactly. But it's a common enough occurrence and sighting that paranormal researchers have made note of this. Okay. Our belief in shoes makes them real. Okay, so it's very, very common. Now, so it's very, very common for us to have a sense of who or what the person is, even if we don't actually know what the person is. And for some very bizarre reason, we do, as human beings, have an innate sense of what the spirit is trying to portray itself as. And our minds then fill in the blanks. Okay? And that's why we see these spirits wearing clothes. Because our minds are filling in the blanks. So, like, for example, if we see we feel that like we're in a 19th century ghost town in the Wild West. Okay, if we happen to see a apparition there, we are likely to fill it in with the context that's around us. So we would fill it in with maybe an old guy wearing a Stetson and wearing cowboy chaps, that sort of thing. So, context is a very strong, helps our brains fill in what's missing. So, in very strong terms, this could be, the Witch of Endor here, perceived this was a prophet. I mean, she would have undoubtedly have heard of Samuel anyway. I mean, Samuel was a famous prophet. I mean, she would... Now, I mean, it is true that the Witch of Endor had a familiar spirit that she used. Okay, so there was a little bit of a con game going on here. She wasn't really pulling people up, so she was expecting a familiar spirit, and what she got was Samuel instead. So because she got something she didn't expect, her brain filled in the whole sort of Samuel, what a prophet would look like. Prophet would wear a mantle. Okay, a prophet would wear a tunic. Samuel was old. Okay, so there would have, when her familiar spirit did not arrive, then her mind filled in the rest. So even though spirits do not wear clothes, they don't have bodies, thus they don't have physical appearance, they do have impressions. And those impressions can lead the living to fill in the blanks. Okay? So anyway, that's how I would best explain this. Thank you very much for the super chat. I hope this helps. Now, you said there was a follow-up question here? Yeah, Yorod said, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? Is the thing I will say next time someone wants to include me in drama I have nothing to do with. Yeah, okay, yeah. I think that's probably a good thing to say anyway, but fair enough. 1000 clever boy. This stream might give me nightmares tonight. Could be. Yeah, this is turning out to be one of those special live streams. Okay. So, let's get back. Back to the super chats. Get there. All right. So anyway, I want to thank JP for that interesting question. Not a lot of people are going to be sleeping tonight, I'll tell you that. Okay. Jack Ray, Ancient Egypt of the Bible has ISR app. Oh, by the way, I did check my email before we went on live stream. Thank you very much for that $30 super chat. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate your generous support of this channel. So much appreciate it. Okay, the next super chat here is from David Jenkins for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What do you think about the Serapeum of Saqqara? Interesting site. Very interesting site. How do you think they made and moved those giant boxes? Thank you both for your excellent work. Well, you're most welcome. Okay. Basically the same way they moved all sarcophaguses. Okay. Which is they constructed them outside the tombs and then dragged them in. And then usually build the tomb around them. So this was very, very common methods. We do see several tombs being done this way. So they would basically carve out, hollow out the sarcophagus, and granted, this the sarcophaguses of the Apis bulls at the Serapeum. Basically, the Serapeum was basically a tomb. It's a special tomb for the bulls that were thought to be incarnations of the god Osiris. Okay? And most of these date to the Ptolemaic period. Now, these sarcophaguses are huge. I mean, they're meant to hold, well, bulls, you know, male cows. So, I mean, they're big. They're really big. And they're really heavy. Okay? But they're not the heaviest blocks that the Egyptians have ever had to move. So, we've got to keep that in mind too. But what they would do is they would import stone from other places. So, a lot of, say, the black granite sarcophaguses. You know, they'd have to go to a special quarry to extract this stuff, and they'd carve it there, and then they would move it. Once it was at least roughly carved there, they could put it on a boat and then move it to Saqqara. And after they got it to Saqqara, then they just used sledges and levers to move it into the tomb. And then once they got it in the tomb, they could brick up the outsides. Okay, so it's not a mystery how they got them there. Most tombs were built this way anyway. Like, for example, almost all the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, they were built by hollowing out the tomb first and then moving the sarcophagus in. And then they would finish the tomb. So moving a sarcophagus into the tomb was sort of a a process that happened midway through the construction of the tomb. So, again, not the biggest stones they've ever had to move. Certainly a lot lighter than some of the foundation stones of pyramids. Definitely much, much lighter than an obelisk. I think the obelisks were probably the heaviest stones that the Egyptians ever had to move. So, given how they were able to move obelisks with relative ease, the rest of it is just sort of, less of a challenge. Okay? So anyway, that's how I think they moved it. They used boats and sailed it right up to Saqqara. And there was a harbor in front of Saqqara. We know that. You actually can still see it today. It's actually right by the visitor center. If you go to Saqqara today, you can actually see the harbor. It's not marked, but it's there. You can see it. And it's, as I say, right by the visitor center. So it's really interesting. It's actually incredibly interesting that they put the visitor center right by the harbor. So, but yeah, they moved boats right up to it, and they could offload it there and move it into place, pretty easily. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Josh Nichols for $19.99. Thank you very much for that super chat. Good evening, Dr. Falk. Take a non-super chat. Okay. Let's see here. We'll take Talitha Coombs. How's that sound? All right, here's the non-super chat we will take. And she asks, were Amram and Jochebed, the parents of Moses, literally nephew and aunt as stated in Exodus 6:20, or is this another Near Eastern idiom? Okay. When we talk about labels for family relations, these are each language has its own system. Like, for example, in English, we use something called the Inuit system. Now, it's not derived from the Inuit, but in English, we have separate words for father and mother, aunt and uncle, cousins, and brothers and sisters. We have separate terms for all of that. And that's generally called the Inuit system. Okay? But not every language treats it this way. For example, in Latin, you've got a different word for your father and mother, of course, your sisters, your brothers, your cousins on your mother's side, another term for your cousins on your father's side. Both male and female have separate terms for all those cousins. You have different terms for your aunts and uncles on your mother's side, and different terms again for aunts and uncles on your father's side. Okay? So you've got all these different terms for different family relations. Now you take another example, like in, say, Polynesian systems, okay, where you have a father and a mother, and your aunts and uncles are also fathers and mothers, and your cousins are your brothers and sisters. Highly simplified. Now, where does Hebrew fall in this spectrum? Kind of somewhere closer to Polynesian systems than, say, the Inuit system. Okay? So, what you have is your aunts and uncles would be called, say, you know, your father's sister. Okay? And your cousins would be called your father's sister's sons and daughters. Okay. So they could extend it in that way, but it also could be abbreviated as well to sons and daughters. Now, the problem with the Hebrew system is that, unlike most systems where you get the differentiation of their various relations on a horizontal end, in Hebrew, you lack that differentiation going vertically, so back in time. So your mother and father is basically your mother and father. But your grandparents are also your mothers and fathers because they had no separate word for grandparents. And their great-grandparents were also your fathers and mothers. Your children would be your sons and daughters, but you'd also be your fathers and mothers' sons and daughters too, because there was no separate word for grandchildren. So it gets really, really tricky when it starts talking about this sort of thing. So when it talks about Amram's father's sister, which father is going to become the question here? Is it his direct father? Is it his, and assuming here in Exodus 6, where it talks about, let me just pull it up here. Exodus 6. Pull up the Bible here. Okay, because before 20, okay, so we have, in verse 20, Amram married his father's sister Jochebed. Okay. And who's his father, of course, is Kohath. Okay. Now, there's 100 years that separate Kohath and Amram. So, if you've got 100 years separating them, there could be a lot of generations between, a lot of different fathers between Amram and Kohath. Is Jochebed Amram's father's sister? His grandfather's sister? His great-grandfather's sister? You could have a huge separation of genetic lines in 100 years. So, while the parents here is the lineage here is not going to be clear. It just can't be clear just because of the way that Hebrew uses those family relations of direct descent. So, the only thing we can be sure of here in verse 20 is Jochebed is related to one of Amram's fathers, but we don't know which one. So, unfortunately, it's not quite precise here. And frankly, because it is the father's sister, it could even be this, where the sister here is a great, let's say it's a splitting off of, say, one of Kohath's sisters, or Amram's sisters, and then 2-3 generations down the line, that father begets Jochebed. So it's very hazy. This is just normal for this is just normal for Hebrew genealogies. At Toledo's. I wish it was clearer. I wish they had better terminology for this, but they don't, unfortunately. So, it's not literally a nephew and aunt. There could be a lot of distance between those two relations. So we have to be very, very careful not to impose our family terminology that we used in, say, the English Inuit system with what's happening here in this particular chapter. So anyway, thank you very much for that question. I want to thank Josh Nichols here for sponsoring a non-super chat, and very, very much appreciate the support of the channel. Okay, Jack Ray buys us a coffee for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Well, we are surviving on our coffee tonight. Got 4 hours of sleep last night, so, coffee's a good thing right now. So I'm going to keep the coffee pouring here. So anyway, thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much for the cup of coffee. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you for the super chat. Okay, we have a super chat here from Japonis Conrafi for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is Adam understood as a literal first man, or the first man that God interfered with, apart from other humans he did not? Both, neither, other perspective. Hope the question makes sense. Okay. This is a question I actually don't have an opinion on. So, I think it's very clear that Adam here is, say, the federative first human. Essentially, he's the first human with moral responsibility. God has relationship with Adam, and he says to the man, okay, you can eat of any tree of the garden except that one. Adam's humanity isn't his biology. Adam's humanity is the choice. And I think we have to be very, very clear about that. Adam's humanity, it stems from the fact he has moral responsibility. He's the first human because he's the first human who's morally responsible. See, one of the things we have to get is animals don't have that. Animals don't have moral choice. I have a little bunny. That's my pet. I have a pet bunny. And she's adorable. Okay? She's adorable. But she doesn't have moral choice. God never presented animals with that moral choice. And thus, animals did not see themselves as naked. There's no animal on this planet that sees themselves as naked. Animals are just animals. They're animals because they don't have moral choice. Adam became the first man because he was given moral choice. So when we look at something like this, it's almost asking the wrong question whether or not he was a literal first man. Because there's implications loaded into that have almost nothing to do with biology and everything to do with the Imago Dei. The filling the man with the Spirit of God. So that man became, say, God's idol in his sacred space. Therefore, because God made man his image, man now had the prerogative to choose good or to choose evil. And that's the choice that makes him human. That's that image of God, that ability to choose between good and evil. That's his humanity. So whether or not there were, say, ape-like ancestors to the first man is almost irrelevant to that. Because all God would have to do is take one of those ancestors or descendants and fill him with his spirit and the image of God to turn him into a human being. So there's a lot of here implications that sort of go beyond those questions. And I think a lot of research on, say, Genesis has not engaged those questions. And I think they need to be engaged. I really do. I think there is important considerations here. Higher questions than just simple biology. There's spiritual questions that are involved in this that I think really demand solid answers. But nobody's asking the questions. So I think this has been really unfortunate, and I think a lot of the debate in American, in the American origins debate, between maybe evolutionists, theistic evolutionists, old Earth creationists, young Earth creationists, have really muddied the waters here, because we're not asking those higher questions. So, anyway, that's how I would answer this. Is what made him man is the imago Dei. What made him human is the choice. Is the moral choice, the moral responsibility. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Jack Ray for $5. I have Fulcron sees all chat questions. Well, I do. when we post our thumbnail for the live stream, it is with the understanding that people can post their questions there ahead of time. And we encourage that. It gives us an opportunity to start the live stream with questions immediately. So that way we can just say, okay, we've got a few questions in the hopper, ready to go. And we figured people would then add more questions as we go along. Okay, fantastic. But one of the things about YouTube as well is after a while it drops those questions. They time out. But for me, they time out over an entire day. So I see all the questions that come in. So they don't disappear. I see them. I see each and every one that's dropped in. So unless my computer suddenly crashes or does something really strange, I see them all. And even say with super chats, there's a permanent record of them. So yeah. I do cut and paste the non-super chats, which is why the first chats in the stream look a little different than the ones later on. It's because we're cutting them right out of the live chat.
Historical strategy gave me a report.
That's funny. Hasn't come up yet, but that one's good. I like that one. Historical Strategy Gaming says, then he records them on a clay tablet. I actually have a clay tablet around here. Believe it or not. See if I can find it. quickly, of course. I won't spend a lot of time digging through my desk for this, but yeah, I actually have a clay tablet on my desk somewhere. What do I do with it?
Yeah, please don't throw the clay tablet back in the you.
Here's my clay tablet. I actually have a clay tablet.
Circle strategy gaming. And we're confirmed.
Rumor confirmed. Okay. Well, no, there's no writing on it at the moment. Okay. This is my clay tablet. This is my stylus. Yeah, it's made out of a little chopstick. Okay. And you can use it to write cuneiform. Write some curses on it. Holy Mount Hill, Batman! Publish my writing. Yeah, you get some modeling clay, and you can actually this is how you practice your cuneiform. Is by actually making yourself a little stylus, go to Michael's or whatever craft stores in your local area and get some modeling clay. Get the stuff that's brown color though, because that looks more like what would be used back then, and you can get a nice feel for learning cuneiform. PC, write some curses on it. Do it as a drunk ant wanders. That clay tablet makes more sense than a silly bit of accidental marks on a piece of lead film. Well... Wannabe scholar. Right, cursed, but it got Yahweh, then leave it on Mount Ebal. Oh, I think they got enough problems right now. Whoa. Oh, this is just... I mean, the latest is... I mean, it's getting worse. I mean, it's getting worse, not better. Just when you thought that this controversy would die down, that they would be, crawl into some hole over shame. No, they've proposed a conference. Stripling has now proposed having a conference over the Mount Ebal amulet. Yeah, Urad, I heard it's getting illegal. Yeah, well, it was questionable anyway. But now the Palestinians are up in arms over this because they, Urad says, I heard it's getting illegal. There's nothing getting illegal. It looks like it was illegal. The excavation was done in Palestinian territories. The permit had expired. Okay, the permit to dig had expired, and it is a controlled archaeology site. So, Stripling claimed to have used Zertel's excavation license, but those licenses have to be renewed on an annual basis. And Zertel had already been dead for years at this point, so there's no way that license could have been legal. The Palestinians were up in arms that the amulet was moved into Israeli territory without their permission. So, there's... Yeah, this is getting dicey. I mean, this is... Ugh, a Palestinian prison sounds rough. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, you do not want to end up in a Palestinian prison. Not after you've done, not after you've ransacked their culture. Okay, if you ransack the culture, yeah, you're not going to get some good. You're not going to get the good treatment in a Palestinian prison. That's for sure. Um, yeah, you're. And I don't think Scott Stripling would do very well in a Palestinian prison. Uh, Jack Ray says that went pear-shaped. Oh, it's just getting worse by the moment. But as I said, though, I can't believe he's holding a conference on this. You know, after this fiasco. Um, yeah, Vanderveen has now basically thrown the others under the bus. And Vanderveen's a weasel too. You know, he's a real weasel. Oof. Oh yeah, you probably did hear a Discord message alert. I should probably mute that. Yeah, he should hold that conference in Palestine. Oh boy. That would end well. Well, I mean, he Stripling even used an illegal Israeli settlement as his support mechanism. So the Palestinians are furious with Stripling. They're furious. And as Hamas sponsored events, yeah. Yeah. But yeah, they're furious at him. So yeah, this has become a PR debacle. I mean, it's not just become a fiasco, an academic fiasco. It's become a PR debacle. It's an international rights debacle. I mean, it's a potential violation of the UNESCO treaty. It's a potential violation of the UNESCO treaty because he's moved an artifact from an occupied territory to the mother state. That has potential to be a violation of the 1978 UNESCO treaty. I mean, woo. But yeah, this is just getting worse and worse by the day. You know, if Stripling had been smart about this, he would just let this die, like he normally does. You know. Well, historical strategy gaming. Did the Palestinian Authority sign it? Well, it's almost immaterial because when the treaty was made, the Palestinian Authority was not a separate political entity, so they would have inherited the signatory status. So, but yeah, it was just really. This is just to say this went pear-shaped is it's almost doesn't do it proper service. I mean, it's just bad all around, just bad. But a lot of these shenanigans are happening in Christian-sponsored archaeology, and it shouldn't. I mean, take Steve Collins for example. You know, he allows his diggers to take pottery home from Tel El Haman, which is really, really illegal. It's really illegal. Jordan does not permit you to do this. But he allows his diggers to do it. You know, we should be holding up the laws of the whatever state we're digging in. You know, that's the ethical thing to do. You're guests. Yeah. And it's give to Caesar what is Caesar's as well. But we, as archaeologists, are guests in these foreign countries. We should be well behaved. We should follow the archaeological laws. Oh boy. The fact that we have these these guys trying to run around prove the Bible while breaking the laws. It's a blot on our testimonies. We should be better than this. Jeez.
Yeah, harder to beat the colonizer.
Yeah, Francis Dodd make a great point here. Harder to beat the colonizer allegations, sadly, and I totally agree. I totally agree. You know, just
1880s call. They want their own.
oh yeah. You know, that's about it. No, I just think, I mean, we shouldn't be behaving this way. We really shouldn't. And the 1880s called. They want the archaeology back. It's a violation of the third commandment. Well, it certainly is a violation of the thou shalt not steal. No, no, don't steal artifacts, okay? I mean, we're not living in the days of Indiana Jones, okay? Come on, really? Oh boy. Yeah, I mean, yeah, this raises my blood pressure when I see stuff like this. I go spare. It's just irresponsible. Irresponsible and immoral. Immoral. For pity's sake. Okay, so let's move on to the next super chat here. All right, so I'll go back here to AO6. Actually, I'll take that non-super chat. There was a good question that just popped up by Lego David. He asks, which countries aren't as strict with archaeology laws and would allow people to do such things? There is some countries that do allow this. The one that pops to mind is Sudan. Sudan allows you to take home an awful lot of stuff. Nothing of huge historical significance. But, for example, in Sudan, if you're at an archaeological site, they will allow you to take home pottery. Israeli laws are actually quite liberal on this, too. Which is, if you find something on the surface, you can take it home. Provided it's not, a critical piece. But pot shards that you find on the surface have no archaeological value. So, you know, you're allowed to do that in Israel as well. Sudan has more liberal laws than probably anybody else on this. They don't really have any archaeological laws per se. But still, it would be still a pretty crummy thing to do to steal their best stuff. You know, it's just from a moral standpoint, it's still a crummy thing to do. So, yeah. So there are countries that have less strict laws on this sort of thing, but again. Oh look! I found an old tank on the surface of this hill. Yeah, I wouldn't go to Sudan at the current moment, though. Yeah, I agree. No, stay out of Sudan right now. It's not a good place. Yeah, you stay away. It's at least until it calms down a bit. Alrighty. Okay, so anyway, that was a nice little diversion there. Another rabbit trail. Definitely the night of rabbit trails. Okay, so I want to thank Jack Ray for that last super chat. I did get into some pretty interesting things fast, though. All right, our next super chat here is from Josh Nichols for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, Daniel 10:6, what is Burl? Any theories? Any of the study Bible said that we don't know. Well, let's just take a look at it. It's Daniel 10. All right. And bring it up here. All right. And the text reads, his body was like beryl. His face had the appearance of lightning. His eyes were like flaming bronze. And the sound of his words like the sound of tumult. All right, let's see what the word for beryl is. It is Tarshish. Oh, now there's an interesting word. Let's see what Alot says about this. Tarshish is the word that's also used for Spain. Okay, so that's actually really interesting right there. So, but it's obviously referring to something else, like a precious stone of some kind. Now, what kind of stone? Nobody really knows. So I don't think it's most likely, there's a lot of uncertainty here. It's probably closest to topaz. Okay. Now, topaz is a stone that now we think of topaz today, and we think of the blue topaz. Now, most of the blue topaz you have today is artificially colored. Now, what do we mean by artificially colored? Most of the topaz that's basically dug up out of the ground doesn't have a great color to it. It's either kind of brownish or yellowish. Yellow is called a topaz. It's called imperial topaz. It's very valuable. Very, very. It's golden yellow. It's beautiful stuff. It's really, really valuable. And it's really expensive when it's natural. Okay. Most of the topaz we have today, if you buy it in a store, you see blue topaz. Oftentimes Swiss topaz, London blue topaz, which is the more stable of the two. And I think there's a third type as well. Essentially what they do is they basically take the topaz and irradiate it. They irradiate it.
If you're ever carrying topaz, don't put it in your suitcase.
Yes, if usually they allow it to cool off, but it can remain radioactive and set off radiological detectors. Okay. However, this is also one of the reasons because, say, Swiss topaz, when you if you have that stuff, I mean, it's gorgeous, looks gorgeous, but never set it in the sun, because the sun will actually reverse the coloration. Okay. So, what were they probably talking about here? And we have to understand that before the 19th century, blue topaz was rather rare. Imperial topaz was plentiful. Today it's reversed because of that irradiation process. So this is probably talking about yellow, or what's called imperial topaz. So the idea here is that he's a gold color. Golden, beautiful golden color. Imperial topaz is a very warm yellow too. So it's absolutely gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous if you see it. Unfortunately, most of it's off the market these days, so it's hard to get. But I've seen some real nice quality topaz in my time. But yeah, it does come it does come in blues and yellows. Some of it, the blue stuff, there is natural blue topaz as well, but it's usually because topaz had been formed beside a a radiation source of some kind. So that's how people discovered blue, the source of blue topaz anyway. So I think the most likelihood at this point is this is topaz. Again, yellow topaz, the imperial topaz, but we're still not 100% sure. And we can't be 100% sure of any of these identifications. And some of these identifications might have changed over time. Darkblade said, as someone born in November with topaz as my birthstone, I am qualified to confirm that it is excellent. It is excellent. But we have to understand that the birthstones was a 19th century marketing gimmick. Okay? It's a 19th century marketing gimmick to try to push stones that jewelers had a surplus of. They quite literally invented this as a marketing trick. And it's highly effective. I mean, it's one of the best marketing gimmicks ever done. But it was also done back in the day and age when, say, yellow topaz was really common. They had a lot of it. Today, it's not so common. Now it's really expensive, which is why on a lot of birthstone charts now you see yellow topaz replaced with citrine. Because citrine is a lot less expensive, it's a lot more common, and jewelers have a surplus of it. Essentially. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope you found that interesting. Okay. Sentinel Apologetics for $2 Australian. Good to see you tonight, Rob. I hope you're doing well. Blessings, David and everyone. My family is safe. Wonderful. Thank you for letting us know that. We've been praying for you. We've been supporting your fundraiser. Really, really glad you're all safe. We're really glad that God came through. So we praise God for that, and it's really good to see you here tonight. And I'm so glad this has worked out. So praise God, and because He deserves all the glory for this. So blessings to you also and to your family as well. Okay, Alexander Mendez for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hey, Dr. Falk, how do you interpret 2 Kings 3:27, and what do you think about the Mesha Stela in comparison to the biblical narrative? Okay. There's a lot of issues in this, okay? So it's going to be hard for me to cover this all in a 3-minute super chat. So let's dig into this. 2 Kings 3:27. Okay. And this is talking about, we have to understand that there's a coalition here. Okay, the background of this text is that there was a coalition. Now, the House of Omri, basically the northern kingdom of Israel, had made Moab a vassal state. And Moab rebelled. Okay. And Omri, the House of Omri, the northern Israel, allied with the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Edom to basically try to bring Moab back under Israel's control. So, the Mesha Stela basically is the Moabite side of this conflict. And verse 27 here reads, then he, and this is talking about King Mesha, took his oldest son who was to reign in his place and offered him as a burnt offering on the wall. And there came great wrath against Israel, and they departed from him and returned to their own land. Okay? So there does seem to be some indication that that there was a rally, essentially. Now, the conflict originally was the prophet in this passage here predicts that the coalition, the three of them, will have a victory. They'll burn their cities and crops and etc. Okay, and that happened. That happened. But then, for some strange reason, the house of Omri, the kingdom of northern Israel, decides to go on their own, while the other two partners held back. And it's at that point that they engage the Moabites again. And at that point, Mesha offers his son up as a sacrifice, which does seem to be confirmed by the Mesha Stela, and then goes on, rallies the troops, and, you know, sort of turns the tides against the kingdom of northern Israel. Okay, forcing them to retreat. So this is one of those cases where the prophecy doesn't promise complete victory. It promises a coalition victory, which happened, but then they went beyond it. So I think this is one of those things where Mesha Stela isn't telling you the side where they get beaten back to their city. So it's the very end of this narrative where the Mesha Stela is giving us more info. And it's consistent with what we have here of verse 27. But that consistency is going to be through the eyes of Mesha himself. So, you know, the Mesha Stela says they were victorious in the end. 2 Kings 3:27 says King Mesha was victorious in the end, but only in that rally. So I think it's completely consistent, but again, you have to look at this, how the narrative progresses here to see what Mesha is talking about, what the 2 Kings is talking about, and see where the two sort of, you know, correlate. And it does seem to be in this verse 27 that you find the correlation, but not in the entire narrative. And the entire narrative does seem to indicate that the king of Israel went too far and went ahead of his allies. So there was a brashness there that just isn't, that didn't bode well for him. So anyway, that's how I interpret it. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. Okay, Captain said for 25 Mexican pesos. Thank you very much for the super chat. He says, good evening. Question in the live chat. Okay. It's far up, huh?
It is in your video about destiny.
Okay.
Description. Where it make this.
Okay, let me see if I can find it here. Okay, underneath. Is it below this or above it? Have I taken that super chat yet? I got Alexander Mendez's. I've got another Captain Seb question. How prevalent is theological liberalism in secular studies? Is that the one he's talking about? That's right above it? Which question is it? Captain Seb, if you're on here, we're not sure which question you're asking us to answer. So I can only assume it's the one above. So we'll take the one above then. No, this is Captain Seb. I see theological studies. Okay, I see the one okay, I see it. All right, here it is. In your video about death in the garden, you connect the description of the king of Tyre in Ezekiel 28 with the serpent in the garden. How do you make that connection? Okay, let's pull up Ezekiel 28 and you'll see. All right. Ezekiel 28. All right. Now let's read the passage. The word of the Lord came again to me, saying, Son of man, you say to the leader of Tyre, Thus says the Lord God, because your heart is lifted up, and you have said, I am God, I sit in the seat of gods, in the heart of the seas, yet you are a man, not God, although you make your heart like the heart of God. Okay, so far, it's talking purely about the king of Tyre. Yeah, okay, he's a man. You get it. Behold, you are wiser than Daniel. There is none secret that is a match for you. Okay, we're starting to depart here from just a mere mortal, okay? By your wisdom and understanding, you have acquired riches for yourself, and have acquired gold and silver for your treasuries. By your great wisdom, by your trade, you have increased your riches, and your heart is lifted up because of your riches. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, because you have made your heart like the heart of God. Therefore, behold, I will bring strangers upon you, the most ruthless of nations, and they will draw their swords against the beauty of your wisdom and defile your splendor. Okay. So let's skip down. Bit here, verse 9. Will you say, I am a god in the presence of your slayer? Although you are a man, not God, in the hands of those who wound you. Okay, fair. Okay, and then it starts to take a change here. Again, we get a second prophecy here in verse 11. And the word of the Lord came to me, saying, quote, Son of man, take up a lamentation of the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says the Lord God, you had the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and beauty. King of Tyre? 13. You were in Eden. Okay. King of Tyre was never in Eden, but somebody else was. The garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. The ruby, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, the jasper, the lapis, the turquoise, and emerald. And the gold, the workmanship of your settings and sockets was in you. This is figurative language for saying, hey, you were made perfect. You were made gorgeous. On the day that you were created, they were prepared. Verse 14 is the kicker on this one. You were the anointed cherub. Okay. This being is a cherubim. And not just any cherub, the one that was in Eden, who covers. He's a throne cherub. This whole idea of cherubs stretching out their wings in front of them and covering sacred space. This is something you find primarily of throne cherubs. And the prophecy continues, and I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. By the abundance of your trade, you were internally filled with violence, and you sinned. Therefore, I have cast you as profane from the mountain of God, and I have destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom by reason of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. This is that allusion here to the serpent being said he's going to be stricken to the ground, and he will eat dust all the days of his life. Okay. I will put you before kings that they may see you. By the multitude of your iniquities, the unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned your sanctuaries. Therefore I have brought fire from the midst of you. It has consumed you. I have turned you to ashes on the earth in the eyes of all who see you. And all who know you among the peoples are appalled at you. You have become terrified, and you will be no more. Okay. So, this is how we connected to the serpent in the garden. He's a covering cherub. Okay. We do know that cherubim were in the garden. He was in Eden. He was there. He was there when man fell. He was struck to the ground. Just like what happened to the serpent in the garden. You know, he was given the splendor and the beauty, but he also misbehaved. You know, he started acting out in ways that are not befitting of a cherub. So, it's very clear that this is the serpent of the garden. Now, again, it's a basically what the text is saying is that the king of Tyre is a type of the serpent in the garden. He's not one and the same, but he's a type of serpent. He's a type of person who had great talents and abilities and fortunes, but had violence and iniquity in his heart. So that's the connection. So while Ezekiel 28 is talking specifically about the king of Tyre, it is using the illustration, the analogy of the Nakash serpent in the garden to make those connections. So this is how you find it, because it's all pretty much laid out for you right there. So anyway, hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for that question. Wait a minute, that's a different question, hon. That's not Seb's question. That was Wannabe Scholar's question. Okay. So, I guess it is that one up there on the liberalism. All right, so that's got to be his question then. All right. So, sorry about that, Seb. How prevalent is theological liberalism in secular biblical studies departments? Very common. Very, very, very common. In fact, it's the overriding, it's the predominant view. It goes on. It's often claimed that critical scholars in these departments are Christian and Jewish. Yeah. They're also atheists and Buddhists. You get all sorts of people with all sorts of beliefs in these departments. And a lot of them that claim to be Christian are only nominally Christian. They're not practicing Christians. So, you know, we've seen this enough to recognize this. So, I would say the vast majority of biblical studies departments today that are secular are theologically liberal. I mean, there's no question about it. You would be very hard pressed to find a lot of basically a secular biblical studies department that was, say, theologically conservative. It'd be very unusual these days. Yeah, that doesn't disqualify the quality of the education, okay? Mind you, okay? So we're going to be careful about that. We're not saying you would get a bad education, but what you would get is a theologically liberal education. So that can be good. That can be very high quality. There are some faculties which have secular biblical studies departments that are really quite top-notch. But they're also not going to... I mean, some of them are going to try to drive the faith out of you. You know, and that's just the way it is. Like, there's some, like, for example, there's a religious studies department in the University of Toronto. Very liberal. And they will try to drive the faith out of you. So, you know, you got to be aware of that, too. Some don't care. Some don't care what you believe. But others will you know, hunt you down and try to convert you. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat, Captain said. Very much appreciated, and hope that answered your question. Okay. Jack Ray for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sponsor live chat question. Okay. What do we want to take? Let's see here. That too. Okay, let's see what we can find here. We'll go back here, see if we can find something interesting here. Oh, okay. I'll take Wolfgang Alan Lazar's question here. He asks, do you have a favorite monster in Egyptian myth and or folklore? Yes, I do. Amit. The Soul Eater. It's this, how do I say it? It's a female demon monster. Okay. It's a she. It's, yeah, you're right, the croc thing. Yes, the croc thing. Head of a crocodile. Oh. Body of a lion, hindquarters of a hippo. And those who were weighed on the scale, when their heart was weighed on the scale and was found too heavy, Thoth would pick up the heart and chuck it into the mouth of Amit. And Amit would eat it. Nom nom nom. Yummy souls. Yeah, just, yeah, think of Moon Knight. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, that one's my favorite. There's not much written on Amit, unfortunately, but you see pictures of it all over the place. It's very interesting. I've been in temples where I've seen it portrayed on the temple walls. So, you know, it has gotten, like, for example, there's a picture of Amit at the temple of Seti the First at Abydos. You know, it's not exactly where I expected it. There was also one, I believe, at the temple at Deir al-Medina. So, you know, you do see these pictures of this thing pop up from time to time. And, yeah, very, very cool. It's very cool. But yes, Amit is my favorite Egyptian monster. Very, very cool monster. But that's kind of an easy one too, because very picturesque, very front and center. I will take the follow-up question here that Chao Yi just posted. And he posts, is there any evidence that Amit was worshipped as a god? The answer is no. There's no evidence that Ammit was worshipped as a god. In fact, there's every indication that seems to be that Ammit wasn't worshipped as a god. If anything, it's more like just a placeholder, an explanation for what happens to naughty souls. Souls that didn't go through the right rituals. So, nobody had ever worshipped Ammit. We don't find any amulets of Ammit. We don't find any texts or hymns to Ammit. So there's no indication at all that Ammit was ever worshipped. She was kind of more, as I say, a placeholder for saying what would happen if, let's say, you didn't do the correct rituals and you didn't purify your soul through magic. Then your fate could end up in the jaws of Ammit. So, nobody ever worshipped Ammit, and she does not appear to be worshipped as a god. Even though she was one of the Netshuru, which is the Egyptian word for gods, little g gods. Okay? So anyway, thank you for that question. It was also a very interesting question. Okay, back to 823. Okay. So again, I want to thank Jack Ray for sponsoring that question. We really appreciate it. Okay, BC for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Isn't prophecy only a message that comes from God? What do you think of the practice to turn to your neighbor and prophesy in church congregations? Okay, that's a very interesting question. It's a very denominational question, too. Because the whole idea of prophesying does seem to fall down along, say, denominational lines. You'll find Pentecostals be much more into the whole idea of modern-day prophecy than you would say magisterial denominations or even, say, mainstream Protestant denominations. So, yeah, the modern Calvary Chapel, not so much. But old Calvary Chapel, yeah, did do a lot of prophesying. But today, they don't do very much. I think that I think one of the things that we don't understand about prophecy is its role. And once we talk about a little bit about this, there's two aspects of prophecy. Everyone's familiar with the predicting the future aspect of prophecy, the foretelling. But that was really the small minority of prophecy. Very few prophecies actually foretold the future. I'd say roughly about 10% in the Bible. Okay. What was more common was the issue, that was the matter of forthtelling. Okay. The idea of forthtelling is the idea that the prophet would go and tell people what was going on right now. Yeah, but from God's perspective. Okay. I remember I attended a lecture from Noam Chomsky. And Chomsky once said, 99% of people don't know what's going on. And they don't know that they don't know what's going on. Well, that's true of every age. That's not just true of today. Every age has been like this. People don't know what's going on. And they don't know that they don't know what's going on. The purpose of the prophet is to let people know what's going on. That's the purpose of the prophet, is to clarify what is going on through the perspective of God himself. Yeah, it's...
is using the word of God to inform people.
Yeah. Yeah, and my producer just said that correct preaching is a form of letting people know what is going on in the world today. And that's not too far from, say, the prophetic role. So, in that respect, if you can open people's eyes to what's happening in the world around them through the biblical perspective, that's prophecy. At least in, say, the more classical sense. But, does that necessarily have to come through directly from God? Like through the voice? Like, for example, one thing about the Old Testament prophets is they were all, you know, had a direct face-to-face audience with God himself to receive that message. Modern prophecy is nothing like that. Say, for example, in Christian churches today, they would say that they got their prophecy from the Holy Spirit, and that the Holy Spirit is prophesying through them. Now, it's true that the Holy Spirit can do that. It's just not very common. And I've seen enough false prophecy that would be very, very hesitant to endorse the practice without some serious caveats. Like, we had one guy come on our channel once who, let's face it, my style's a little snarky, okay? a little snarky, okay? We do use a lot of humor. We are very tongue-in-cheek, and this doesn't. Not everyone likes it. Okay, that's fine. You know, that's okay. That's cool. But we had one guy come on our channel, and you know, he really hates my style. Oh, that's fair. You know, as I say, it's an acquired taste. Not everyone is prepared for this kind of teaching, and that's cool. That's cool. But he prophesied. He prophesied. And basically he said, you know, if I don't change my ways, my channel will never reach 1,000 subscribers. Thus saith the Lord. Okay. Oh boy. Yeah, that prophecy didn't age well. So, you know, I mean, when my wife and I got married, we got married in 1999. We were told, we got married.
Just typing that. What, a week before our wedding?
Yeah, a week before a wedding. You know, we were told to cancel the wedding.
The prophet they followed
Because
was gonna sink.
Yeah, we were a week away from getting married, and everyone is, you know, in my wife's church was telling us, hey, cancel the wedding, you know, because in a week's time, California is going to have an earthquake and sink into the ocean because the prophet had said this. You know, 24 years later, 24 years later, California is still above water. You know, was just, it's just so, you know, I've had enough experience with false prophets that, you know, is just messed up. I mean, you just can't take their word for it. It's just crazy. So, you know, again, prophecy can be a gift from God. It can be a spiritual gift. It also needs to be used correctly, and it has to be a real revelation. You know, not just what you think your heart says, or what your passions tell you think it should be, but it really has to be a message from the divine. And so I'd be very, very careful and very, very cautious before. I mean, look, if God takes you into the throne room himself and presents, you know, you see the angels there, and God says, here's the message, and okay, yeah, go with it, run with it. But if you're not seeing that, you better think twice about prophesying, because there's some serious, serious consequences to prophesying falsely. So I think it's one that it's just one of those spiritual gifts that you have to approach with reverence and respect. Fear of doing it wrong would be a really good thing, and would be really a good guideline here. So, yeah. So anyway, that's what I think about the subject. What? Oh, you just laughed.
Oh, I had put in a comment that I had told the woman
Yeah. Hey, look, I figured if California was going to have an earthquake and sink into the sea, I'm not going to be able to stop it anyway. I might as well be married and have that happen.
they'll be having a heck of a lot of fun while it's going on.
I mean, maybe we'll have taken off for our honeymoon by that time. You know, you never know.
Oh, we certainly have rescheduled it for the next week.
No. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And that's sort of my view on prophecy here in the church. We need to have the fear of the Lord as we do it, because the consequences of messing it up are really high. So the next super chat. Yeah, this is a lot. I mean, that's a violation of using the Lord's name in vain too. You got that portion of that too. Is it's you know, you've taken the Lord thy God's name in vain by prophesying falsely in his name. That's serious stuff. Okay, Wannabe Scholar for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, in the chat about Ezekiel 28. You're really awesome, by the way. Well, thank you very much. And I think we already answered your question by mistake here. So, so we're good. It was a good question. We enjoyed answering it. So, I think we've got that, you know, nailed down. I'm glad you love the channel. We do this as a service to our community. So this is where we encourage people to come, ask their questions, and get answers. Okay, and it's again a way of structuring this so I don't spend my entire week answering questions. So this is our way of, as I say, giving back to the community through doing these marathon sessions of questions and answers. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I'm glad we could answer your question. Historical Strategy Gaming for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thoughts on Total War Pharaoh's depiction of Amenmesse? Laugh out loud. Oh boy, that's so bad. It's so bad. Oh wow, that was. Oh. It doesn't look anything like an Egyptian king. Nothing at all. It's crazy. It just looks really, really. I mean, I can hardly believe how bad that looked. And, you know, it was just. I just saw that and I just went, the feather plume was ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I could not believe how that looked. I mean, okay. The leopard skin kilt. Okay, where do we start with this? I mean, you had that leopard skin kilt. Much better than fig leaves, but the animal prints. Oh, jeez, it was awful. I could hardly believe that. It doesn't look anything like an Egyptian kilt, not at all. That sheep's head belt buckle, whatever it is, not Egyptian, not even in the slightest. The collar doesn't look anything like an Egyptian collar. And what are those pointy things on the side of the collar? That doesn't make any sense. Is that supposed to be armor? I mean, he's not wearing armor. He looks like he's wearing a beaded shirt. Oh, man. And then that headdress, that's ridiculous looking headdress with the ram's horns. It's just... And the feather plume? This does not in any way look Egyptian. It's just... Oh, boy. Oh, boy. Terrible. Absolutely terrible. Oh, wow. Yikes. So, I don't even know what to say about this. Other than not Egyptian. Not at all. Whoa. Oh. So that's my thoughts on this. Did he have a pair of bagpipes? Laugh out loud. Well, you know, Egyptians did wear kilts. That was part of the Egyptian dress, but it was made out of linen. And they were generally white. They weren't leopard skin. Eesh. Oh boy. Another missed opportunity. All right. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. It would have been better with the bagpipes. I mean, really. I mean, Andrew Graham, did he have a pair of bagpipes? Yeah, it would have been a lot better if he had the bagpipes. It would have made more sense if he had the bagpipes. Oh. Oh. Okay. Next one here is from Jedi Ghost Bear for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, I listened to an interview with Matthew Lynch about Old Testament violence where he postulates that Jericho and Ai might be Egyptian outposts or client cities. What do you think about this possibility? I think the evidence for this is thin. Now, we did talk about this a little earlier on. I think our second or third super chat tonight actually talked about this. So we did go into detail of this. The idea that Jericho and Ai were Egyptian outposts is kind of thin. For example, he mentions the Marna letters, you know, mentioning a lot of the city-states in Canaan being vassal states or outposts for the Egyptians. Now, the Egyptians did have garrison cities. Beit Shean was a garrison city. However, we have no evidence that either Ai or Jericho were outposts or client cities for the Egyptians. Probably the last interaction that Jericho had with the Egyptians would have been around the time of Amenhotep III. So that's a long time before the Exodus. There's also no evidence of any correspondence between Jericho and I during, say, the Amarna letter, the Amarna period. I find no evidence of them mentioned in, say, the Amarna letters. So that's going to be this is a difficult connection for him to make, and it's in some ways he has to mash up history a bit to pull this off. So as I said, the weakest part um, of his theory is actually the Egyptian connection. So that's the weakest part here. But I also think too, without that connection, he can't so much. It's more difficult for him to make the case that this is the Exodus part 2 or a defensive posture against the Egyptians. So I think there's some real issues with that. It's the weakest part of his hypothesis. The weakest part by a long stretch. But there was other parts of his interview I really liked. So I think he had some really good points to make. I think his hypothesis could be modified to something that is more watertight, but that his Egyptian connection right now is very weak. So that's all I have to say about that. I thought it was a great interview. Other than that, I think it was opened up a lot of interesting possibilities of how to look at these texts, these conquest texts, in a way that's more nuanced. And I think that was very important right there. Okay, so anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Okay, I am going to take a little break here and grab some more coffee because I didn't have sleep last night, so I have to compensate for it in another way. So I'll be right back in a couple minutes. Okay. All right, we're back. I've got my caffeine here. My cup is no longer full of disappointment. And yummo. All right. Our next super chat here. Let's see here. Do a quick emails check too. Okay. And next one here is from Ed Miggy's Mad Love for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he goes, got any legitimate books from paranormal researchers to recommend? Because there's a lot of bunkum out there. Yeah, there is some good ones. There was one, let me look up my list. I had a bibliography of these that I thought were quite good. But let me just bring up this one here. There's actually a 3-volume set called the Ghosts of the Living, which is actually quite good. Very serious. Basically, paranormal investigations of ghosts from people that were still alive, which is a thing, and it does happen. So that's a very interesting read. But there's another one that I would like to recommend here, and I'll find it in just a second here. Let's see if I can find it here. There's a couple that were actually done by a Christian perspective that I think are worth reading too. Let's see if I can find it. This might take me a minute or two, but OT. And if I don't find it, I'll have to post it another time. So I'm going to try to take a quick look for this, and if I can't find it, it'll have to just be another time. But yeah, okay, here's the course. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, here's one I would recommend. Anthony N.S. Lane, The Unseen World by Baker, published by Baker Books, published in 1996. It has a very important essay in it called Jesus and the Psychiatrists by David Instone Brewer. Okay, so that would be one I would highly recommend. There's also other ones like Powers of Darkness by Clifford Arnold, which is actually a good book as well. So, so there's actually several books on, say, on the paranormal. Some are written from a Christian perspective, some are not. But the best ones have good methodology, have a dose of skepticism to it. A dose, not complete skepticism, but a dose. But I would, that's what I would, those were Lane's book I'd highly recommend. Highly recommend Lane's book. That Ghost of the Living was very interesting. Yeah, I'm not so. Yeah, yeah. That was a very good essay by Instone Brewer. Very good essay. Actually, it's probably the best essay I've ever read on, say, demon possession. So, not so convinced about the Mothman prophecies, to be honest. I'm a little more skeptical about, say, cryptozoology than I am about, say, spiritual. I mean, insofar as cryptozoology is maybe a manifestation of, say, spiritual entities. I'm much more skeptical about the zoological aspect of cryptozoology. So anyway, and I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Next super chat here is from Marv Alice for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, Jehovah's Witnesses assert that this is not Samuel. Obviously, they have a bias. I'm this, but is there any chance they could possibly be right here? No, no chance at all. We'll see why. Okay, so let's pull it up here. And where was that again? First Kings 23, I think it was. Find it again. Let's see if I can find that again. All right, 1 Samuel 28. Okay. All right. So we're going to read the chapter again here, at least parts of it. And we'll start verse 11 here. Then the woman said, who shall I bring up? This is 1 Samuel 28, and we're starting to read from verse 11. Whom shall I bring up for you? And he said, bring up Samuel for me. When the woman saw Samuel, okay, verse 12. So the Bible is here asserting that this is Samuel.
An image.
Not an image, not a ghost of, not an apparition of, not an appearance of, Samuel. Okay. When the woman saw Samuel, yeah, they asserted it is not, seems to be Samuel. Yeah. Yeah, I know what the Jehovah's Witnesses assert here, but the text is very clear. The text is basically asserting this is Samuel. She cried out with a low voice, and the woman spoke to Saul, saying, "Why have you deceived me, for you are Saul?" Okay. And then he said to her, verse 14, "What is his form?" And she said, "An old man coming up, and he is wrapped with a robe." And Saul knew that it was Samuel. And he bowed down his face to the ground and did homage. Verse 15. Then Samuel said to Saul, not a ghost of Samuel, not an imposter, not a demon pretending to be Saul or Samuel, but Samuel. Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Verse 16. And Samuel said, "Why then do you ask me, since the Lord has departed from you and has become your adversary?" Verse 20. Then Saul immediately fell length upon the ground and was very afraid because of the words of Samuel. Not the ghost of Samuel, not the apparition of Samuel, not a demon pretending to be Samuel, not a foul spirit pretending to be Samuel, not an apparition that looks like Samuel, not a Samuel Elvis imposter. Samuel.
Listen, it was Elvis.
Oh, it's Elvis. It's obviously Elvis.
It was Elvis doing a Samuel impersonation.
It's Elvis doing a Samuel impersonation. Hubba hubba. Definitely had to be Elvis. Couldn't be Samuel. Couldn't possibly be. Even though the text asserts it over and over and over again. Yeah, okay, so there's no possibility here that the Jehovah's Witnesses are right, essentially. I mean, you'd have to ignore so much asserting by the text that, yeah, you can't get around this one, okay? So, yeah, they're just, the Bible itself asserts it's Samuel. So... Well, yeah, that's as, there's no way, essentially.
Should be a T-shirt of Samuel.
Darkblade, Elvis is here doing his Dr. Falk impersonation. Could be. Algot Robertson, should be a T-shirt of Samuel Elvis. Ooh. 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 Marv Ellis adds, every once in a while I meet someone who says JWs really know their Bible, though. They know their script well. Okay? Their evangelism technique is by script. They have a script and an answering question book. And if it's not found in the book and it's not in the script, they're helpless like a fish out of water, just flopping around. Oh yeah, it's quite interesting to get them off script because they don't know what to do. They absolutely don't know what to do. They go back and they ask the Watchtower Society, and Watchtower Society like blows them off for a while, and then they finally give them a stack of paper when they try to figure something out, and it doesn't ever answer the question. So, no, those were Mormons. Okay, those were Mormons. That was fun too. Yeah, we had a good time with those Mormons. Boy, that instructor looked so green. Okay, all right. We were, for a time, Kiara and I lived in Nevada. Back back when I had a jewelry business, and we were at an A&W, and there's a Mormon training school really close to Carson City. Okay, really close, and we were having a burger and a root beer at an A&W, and this whole class of Mormon missionaries from the training school came in with their instructor. About 20 of them. About 20 of them. And they my radar soon went up, and I told my wife, hey, a bunch of Mormons just came in. And they got themselves something to eat, and a few minutes, about a half hour later, they came to our table. They actually came to our table, especially picked us out for some reason. And he wanted to give me a tract, and I said, I won't take your tract, but I'd be more than happy to talk about it. Have a seat. So the elder was really proud. He was going to show his kids, his students, how to evangelize to an unbeliever. Oh, okay. Well, at the end of that conversation, that instructor looked so green, it was not even funny. I mean, the students were like, they were not looking very confident anymore. those missionary graduates did not feel so ready to go out on the field after that one. So that was like a very interesting. One tried to make a brave face of it and said, well, in the burning of my bosom, I believe the Book of Mormon is true. And I said, well, in the burning of my bosom, I believe that the Book of Mormon is false. And that was more or less the end of that. Yes. Costco says they chose the wrong one. They did. Oh, yes. Yes, Dr. Falk gets targeted. For some reason, God brings the tough nuts my way. I don't know why.
Visited your parents in years. We went, they got their first witness they had for 6 years.
Yeah. Yeah, they do seem to pick me out. Oh yes, well.
Somebody asked a legitimate question.
Okay. This is your Rod's question here. Have you ever had a discussion about Reformed Egyptian? Genuine question. Yes, I have. And here's the thing. Now, there's no such language as Reformed Egyptian. It doesn't exist. It's completely fictitious. I have talked to Mormons about the Book of Abraham. And once they find out you're an Egyptologist, they get really upset really fast. They'll play the misogyny card. They'll play the persecution card. They get really upset, really angry very quickly. And one other thing, it's really hard to engage Mormons on the whole matter of the Book of Abraham because they feel attacked. They absolutely feel attacked every time. And you don't want them to feel attacked, but you do want them to hear the truth. So, the whole Book of Abraham is nothing but a Book of the Dead scroll. It really is. And there's no such thing as Reformed Egyptian. It's standard Egyptian. It's actually Book of the Dead. So you're talking late Egyptian. Jack Ray asks, "What is Reformed Egyptian?" Okay. When Joseph Smith Jr. he had an interest in Egyptian papyruses, among other things. And after he had translated the Book of Mormon, he got hold of one of these Book of the Dead papyri and claimed to have translated it using the Urim and Thuman, which is a kind of glasses that helps him to read ancient languages, because he wasn't educated in any ancient languages. He could barely speak English. So, so he claimed to have translated that. And interestingly enough, Joseph Smith Jr. published a book that's relatively poorly known on how to translate Egyptian. It's fascinating. It's really fascinating. It has nothing to do with Egyptian. He basically takes a symbolic approach. So he's basically Joseph Smith Jr.'s translation method was to plagiarize large portions of the King James Bible and then correlate them to symbols in the Book of the Dead. Okay? And he takes a symbolic approach. So he's taking each pictogram as basically sort of a how to say it. He ascribes a meaning and then tries to read the biblical narrative into that ascribed meaning. Okay? It has no relationship at all to real Egyptian. And anybody who knows real Egyptian can read the Book of Abraham and see this was never translated from Egyptian. It's got all the earmarks of the King James Bible. But Joseph Smith claimed he brought this papyrus and, a transcription of his transcription of the papyrus. Because he wasn't able to keep the papyrus. He had to dispose of the papyrus. Pretty much for financial reasons. But he made a transcription of it. Quote, of symbols he had read from it. And claimed that this was a language, a lost language called Reformed Egyptian. So that was his claim, that this was a lost language. Only he could read it. And it was a standard language of the Egyptian culture. Well, it's the transcription he did show the transcription to an Egyptologist back in his day, who basically sort of laughed him out of his office and claimed it was a really that there was things like reversed E's in there and parts of the Latin alphabet in there. So it clearly wasn't from anything we know as Egyptian. But I highly recommend his book on translating hieroglyphics if you want a good laugh. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, it's just... and very few Mormons know about that book. That book, I mean, I don't know how many copies he published of that, but very interesting. It was a very interesting read. The approach he used to translation hieroglyphics is very reminiscent of an Arabic book that was written hundreds of years after they lost knowledge of how to speak Egyptian. And that book sort of took that symbolic approach, where you'd see a mouth and you'd translate this as, say, to speak or whatever. Or you see the seated man and say, okay, this is a person in the Bible, that sort of thing. Not, it's the first person possessive pronoun, okay? So, they didn't understand the foundation of the language, so they had to try to figure out how to read the pictographs in a way that sort of made logical sense. So it sounds very much to me that because of there was so much plagiarism involved with the Book of Abraham, I'm much more I mean, the pictures that they use in the Book of Abraham definitely came from the Book of the Dead. You had a funerary beer in there. You've got canopic jars. You've got everything you need there for a good funerary text. But the translation itself would not have been Egyptian, not even close. Egyptian has a certain style and structure to it. It's got syntax. Every language has its own unique syntax. And you can tell a translation from Egyptian because the syntax is preserved. This is the syntax of the Book of Abraham is nothing like what you'd find in Egyptian. Nothing at all. So anyway, Jack Ray, I hope that answered your question. It's a good question, but that's what Reform Egyptian is. It's a fantasy language made up by Joseph Smith Jr. Okay, 902. Okay, and I want to thank, let's see here, who is it? Who is this? The next super chat here is from Kwame Adu 007 for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Couldn't the etymology of Moses' name be just what the text says in Exodus 2? Is it possible that Pharaoh's daughter knew Amoritic living in Avaris and gave Moses his name with Semitic etymology? It's likely that Pharaoh's daughter could speak Amoritic. The problem is we don't have the evidence to that whole Moshe pull out of the water is not likely a name she would have given to Moses. Okay? So I think there's some I think this is one of those things where there's an overlap between an Egyptian etymology and a Hebrew etymology. Okay? That's why I like the Mshe names as a possibility here, because the Mshe names are from the pool. It literally means from the pool. So, like, for example, Montu Mshe, Monto of the pool. So, to have this as a etymology, an Egyptian etymology, and then the Semitic name on top of that, which Mshe mean from to draw out from the, and he is drawn out from the water. I think that makes perfect sense. I think that's a good, strong etymology. It also fits too with the transliteration as well. So I don't think. I mean, there were a few Egyptians that were given Semitic names. Like one of Pharaoh's, Ramses II's daughters was named Binanat. And that's daughter of Anat. So we do have a few Semitic names that we do find in amongst Egyptians, but they're not very common. They're not very common at all. And it would be very, very likely that she would have given Moses a theophoric name of some kind. So, it's possible that he could have been just called Moses or Moshe, but it's also not very likely. Even though his daughter, Pharaoh's daughter, would have probably known Amoritic. But then again, Amoritic was a very commonly spoken language in the city of Avaris too. So, We also don't have enough Amoritic also to know exactly what the origin of Moshe is. We need more Amoritic texts. It would be wonderful if we get like a whole archive of Amoritic texts. That would be absolutely fantastic. That would fill out our understanding of Amoritic, and then we could make some of those comparisons and see, okay, how far do these comparisons go? Also, if you happen to find Moses in a document somewhere, that would also be fantastic. But I'm not counting on that one. I wouldn't expect that one to happen. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped and very much appreciate it. Okay, Jack Ray for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sponsoring a live chat question. Okay, well, we already answered Chow Yi's here. Let's see if we can find another question here. Okay. Lego David, why is Ezekiel referred to as the Son of Man? Isn't that the title that Jesus claimed for himself, thus identifying himself as one of Daniel 7's prophecy? Okay, now, the thing is, the Son of Man, or a Son of Man, is not exclusive to Jesus. Okay, it's a title that Jesus seems to relish, but there is, it is an, the hint here is not only is this messianic, but it's also human. In the case of Jesus Christ, he's the Son of God and the Son of Man. He's both. Fully God, fully man. So when Jesus uses the Son of Man, he is relishing the fact that he has become flesh. As in, say, John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word became God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelled with men. Okay? So, there is that reference here. So, it's the Son of Man is not an exclusively messianic title. However, we do see it in Daniel 7 being used in this way. So it's one of those titles that's both. It's both applied to human beings and it's applied to Messiah. You know, just like, for example, the king. Well, you know, Christ is king. King David was king. Both were kings. It's a title that could be used for both. So it isn't just one. Now, Son of God is a bit different, because the Son of God also has theological implications that go above and beyond the Son of Man. Now, when Christ is using the Son of Man, he is referring to himself in that Daniel 7 sense. But he's also using it in the casual sense, too, of being fully human. So, this is one of those cases where the title does double duty. Whereas, say, example, the Son of God is a God. So that has some theological implications that make it a lot more dicey for Christ to use, say, repeatedly within a first century Jewish context. So he couldn't just keep calling himself Son of God. He would have gotten stoned almost immediately for that. So Christ reserves the Son of God for very, very specific occasions. However, in the case of the Son of Man, he could use that one freely, without anyone being upset over heresy, potentially. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and I want to thank Jack Ray for sponsoring that question. Okay, next one. is. All right, Algot Robertson for 50 Strange Kroners. Thank you very much for the super chat. God bless your coffee. Well, thank you. The coffee is keeping me up. It's keeping me upright, and we'll probably make it to midnight here, thanks to the coffee. So thank you very much for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Okay, let's see the next one here. Jack Ray for $5. Plus one, and he buys us another coffee. Well, thank you very much. We are going through the coffee tonight, but we appreciate the extra cup of coffee. Very, very much appreciated. As I said, when you're operating on 4 hours sleep, you need something to keep you going. So tonight it was coffee, and very, very much appreciate all the support, the financial support, and the extra coffee. Because without it, I would be flat-faced on the computer, and no one wants to see that. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Really, really appreciate it. Okay. Next super chat here. That might be the last super chat. Let's see here. Are we down to the last super chat here? Yeah, it looks like it. That looks like that was the last super chat. Okay. So we're going to take a few more non-super chats, and then we'll probably call it a night. Because it's getting close to 11:30. I do have to go to work tomorrow. So, let's see here. Oh. Just got a super chat from Jack Ray. And it hasn't come through on my console yet here, so we just got to wait a moment here for the refresh. And he basically says, sponsoring a live chat question and he gives us a $5 super chat. Well, thank you very much for the super chat. So let's look for a question. Okay, I'll take this one because the person in question is asking for his son. Yeah. Okay, and this is from Sean Dowie. And he asks, is there any correlation between Greek gods and the Egyptian gods? Asking for my son, which is fantastic. We love fathers who get involved, especially with their children who want to learn about the Bible and the ancient Near East. So we're excited to take these questions. We love these questions. Okay. Now, we have to understand that the Egyptian culture had been going on for 3,000 years by the time it was Egypt was conquered by Alexander the Great in 325 BC. Okay. Up until that point, there was little to no correlation between the Greek gods and the Egyptian gods. Okay. They had developed different lines. I mean, the Egyptian gods had developed, as I said, over 3,000 years. At that point, the Greek gods had developed over a period of 400 years. So there's a definite two different paths that each religion takes. Now, once the Greeks conquer Egypt, basically the new Greek rulers, the Ptolemies, they're going to look at the Egyptian gods and go, this god looks a lot like this Egyptian god looks an awful lot like this Greek god. Like, for example, they'll look at, say, Thoth and go, he looks a lot like Hermes. Looks a lot like Hermes. Or Asclepius. Imhotep. He looks a lot like Asclepius. Gods of healing. In the case of Thoth and Hermes, this god of writing and messaging. Okay. So you're going to get those sort of correlations. The Greeks are going to correlate their gods to the Egyptian gods because the Egyptian gods are a lot older. They're going to equate Zeus, king of the gods, with Amun-Ra, king of the gods. So later on, in the last days of ancient Egypt, from 325 BC onward, they are going to correlate them. The Greeks are definitely going to correlate the Egyptian gods to their own gods. But at the beginning, there was no correlation. That's something that happens later in history. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you for a great question. And as I say, I love parents that ask questions on these live streams on behalf of their children. I think this is wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. It just, one of the things that it says in the Torah is, fathers, teach your children in the ways of the Lord. The responsibility is on fathers. It's on men to teach our children to understand the Bible. And if it's using resources like our YouTube channel, that's fantastic. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. And I hope your son enjoyed the answer. Okay, so we're going to take a few non-super chats and then call it a night. I just took the one from Jack Ray. Or did we miss one?
There's one hybrid Roman. What an ancient year they lived. How would someone living in...
Okay, hybrid Ronin. Okay, I see. Okay. Find it here. Does that happen at the end, or is it? I can find this. Okay, I see Sean's. Okay, see there. Okay. 11:14. So it's around 11:14. Found it. Timestamps are a good thing. Okay. Hybrid Ronin asks, what would an ancient Egyptian call the year they lived in? How would someone living in 1500 BC refer to the time they live in? Okay. The way they would refer to this is according to the regnal year. So they didn't have an epoch calendar. And they wouldn't have an epoch calendar until roughly the Domitian persecution. That's when they start using an epoch calendar. And they'll use an Anno Mundi calendar at that point. But before, in let's say around 1500 BC, they used a regnal date. So what they would do is and they dated their documents. And they would basically start off their documents with a date. So, for example, they would say, in the 5th year of Amenhotep III, season 2 of winter, day 5. So that's how they would date it. Okay. So they would start off with the year, and usually the word Rempet set is set, which was basically a way of saying regnal year, and then the name of the king and his year. Okay, whatever that year was. So somebody around let's say 1500 BC, roughly, would be saying, okay, in the 3rd year of Amenhotep the First, something like that. I don't know exactly when 1500 correlates, but I can look that up too if I had to. Let's see, where is 1500 here? Okay, 1500 roughly correlates to the 13th year of Amenhotep the First. Pretty close, yeah. So for 1500 BC, they would say, in the 13th year of Amenhotep the First. Then they'd give this the month, number, and the Egyptian calendar had 3 seasons of 4 months. 3 seasons of 4 months. So they would mention the number of the month, which season it's in, and then the number of the day. And the calendar had 30 days. Each month had 30 days exactly. So, and then there were 5 extra days tacked onto the end of the calendar for epigomenal days, basically to sync the calendar with the at least try to sync the calendar with the seasons. It didn't work that well, but because the calendar's not 365 days, it's 365 and a quarter. So over 1,000 years of history, that catches up with you. So then that's basically how they did their dates, by regnal year. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that you found that interesting. Okay. All right, the next one, we're going to take another non-super chat here. I will take this one from Lego David here. Was the practice of trying to talk to dead people common in the Near East during the time of Samuel? Yes. Depends what culture, though. Okay. Some cultures thought the practice was common. Other cultures, not so much. There was a practice of necromancy in the Levant. In Egypt, people talked to the dead all the time. It was considered common and normal. People always talked to the dead. The dead didn't always talk back, but people generally, it was seen as culturally normal to talk to the dead people. Yeah, they would ask dead people in Egypt, where coins were buried, is it permissible to spend money? That was actually one of the saddest letters I ever read in an Egyptian text. There was a widower. Okay, he was a laborer, and he talked to his dead wife, through her coffin. asking her for permission to spend money on a pole, a carrying pole, to ease his labor. Eeh. You know, she's dead and gone, and he's still asking her for permission to spend money. Yeah, that was kind of an interesting look into humanity. Now, in Mesopotamia, necromancy was forbidden. It was not culturally normal. It was seen as an act not done, a normal act. So necromancy was forbidden in Mesopotamia. So it really sort of depends on where you were in the Middle East. But say the closer you got to Egypt, the more common it was. The closer you got to Mesopotamia, the less common it got. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. I hope you found that interesting. Thank you very much for the question. All right, I think we will take, we're kind of going to start winding down here. I will take one more non-super chat, and then I think we'll call it a night, and I get to go to bed. Woohoo! Okay. That's actually a very, very interesting question. We'll take this one. This might be our last question of the night. So we'll take this one here from Costco. Who were the Zadokite priests during the time of Melchizedek? Genesis 14:17 to 20. How and why is he king of Jerusalem? Alrighty. Let's go bring the Bible up here, because this is an interesting little question. Because there's background information here that's very interesting. So 14, we'll read from 17 to 20. Then, after his return from the defeat of Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shavah, that is, King's Valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was the priest of God Most High, essentially El Elyon. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abraham, the God of the Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he gave him a tenth of all. All right. Now, there is some very, very interesting background information to this passage. Okay? And first of all, we have to understand, Jerusalem was a Jebusite city. This is not an Israelite city. Not at this time. This is a Jebusite city. These are Canaanites. Okay? These are Canaanites who worshipped Canaanite deities. Jerusalem was not Salem here, but it's called Salem. The original name of the city was Urushalem. Okay? And we find this name in the Amarna letters. Uru, city of Shalem. Shalem is the name of a Canaanite god. Okay? Yes, it's going to be a god of peace later on. That's the sort of the, how do I say it, the personification of peace is the god Shalem. So Jerusalem was originally named after a pagan deity. And later on, it's going to, like the New Testament is going to say, okay, Jerusalem is a typological thing where it's the city of peace. But it wasn't originally called that. It was transformed into that. Yeah, it is Shalem as in shalom. Same root etymology. But Shalem was also the name of a Canaanite deity. And Urushalem is the city of the deity Shalem. Okay? It's the same, going to be the same for Melchizedek. Okay? Zedek is, in Hebrew, means righteousness. Zadok is a god of righteousness, a Canaanite god of righteousness. Okay? Melchizedek is, Zadok is king. It's a theophoric name. So the god of righteousness is king. So there's going to be a whole lot here. There's a whole lot of sort of background information that's behind this question. Why was Melchizedek king of Salem? Because he was the Jebusite king of Salem. He was the Jebusite king. The Zadokite priests, they are the worshippers of Zadok. God is our God of righteousness. So the whole thing here is we've got a little pantheon here of Jebusite deities. We've got Shalem, we've got Zadok, and we've got El Elyon. So there is a sort of a pagan background to all this that gets transformed and is used as a typology for later monotheism. And this is not uncommon. The Bible has done this in several ways. So this is not all uncommon for the Bible to do this. But sort of that is what's going on here, is these are Canaanite priests worshiping a Canaanite deity. And if there's a Canaanite pantheon here, the Jebusite pantheon, and he is basically, Melchizedek has become a king and priest to El Elyon, the highest deity within this Jebusite pantheon. So it's a very, very interesting. He's almost, you could say that Melchizedek is in many ways a henotheist. You know, he believes and is a follower, a devout follower of the highest God, which also, as I said, is a name that Yahweh ascribes to himself as well. Yeah. As my producer here points out, there's a progression of revelation here. There's a natural revelation that people, you know, understand intuitively. And you can see that here with the God of righteousness, the God of peace, the God Most High. But you need that divine revelation to clarify the situation. So natural revelation will take you so far, but you need divine revelation to get the complete picture. And this is the beginning of that trajectory. So, Jan Alkovic, so fun to recognize cognates in different Semitic languages. Oh yeah. So it's totally a blast. I remember a story my father told me, you know, because I had just graduated with my PhD at this time. It was around 2015, and my dad was going to a let's just say a theologically liberal church, and you know, he asked the pastor, you know, what can you tell me about Melchizedek? And the pastor goes, "Oh, you're just making that up. There's no such person as Melchizedek." And my dad goes, "Well, do we know anything about him?" And it's like, okay. I said to my dad, "We know lots about Melchizedek. You know, not personally, but about his culture. Because we do have, say, the Amarna tablets. You know, Amarna tablets do refer to Urushalem. You know, the city of Shalem. You know, we do know from the etymology here, you know, what the etymology is of Melchizedek's name. We know about El Elyon. It's actually even attested in an Aramaic tablet. So, there's a lot we know about the sort of the background information of this pericope of Genesis 14, 17 to 20. So, that's really, really cool that archaeology can bring that information and bring the scriptures alive through it. So we now have a better perspective of this whole interaction here between Melchizedek and Abraham. So, I mean, this is one of those great applications of how archaeology can bring the Bible alive and can show us and help us to understand the details that the biblical writers didn't include. So with that said, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for that question. It was a great question. I think at this point, because we're 10 minutes to midnight here, we are going to call it a night. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed tonight's live stream. I want to thank all the super chatters who donated to the channel. There's something here I got to take a look at just before I sign off here. Okay. So anyway, I want to thank all the super chatters tonight that helped support our channel. You keep food on our table. You help us work towards becoming a full-time content creator, and we really appreciate that help. It's our goal to, in the not too distant future, do full-time content creation where we can make more videos, better videos, and also to start writing books again. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters. You guys have helped keep the lights on, the equipment going, and we really appreciate it. You guys don't get enough thanks, but we are at least now providing content just for Patreon, or at least first showing to Patreon supporters. We also want to thank our regular subscribers who view our channels, who subscribe. And if you haven't hit subscribe already, please do so you don't miss any of our content. And we also
get to see 10,000 sub parties.
Yes, and if you subscribe, you get to see the 10,000 subscriber party sooner. And there will be a party. We also want to thank everyone who puts in comments and likes on our videos. This helps feed the algorithm and helps it to be shown to more people. So with that said, I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.